human thinks it's worth. I don't think that's happening anymore. I think it's shifted because it's definitely now we have exchanges and stuff. Bitcoin's become a consensus, isn't it? Everybody agrees as to what the value is, but you don't go out in the street anymore and then haggle for a bit of Bitcoin, do you? It's just never going to happen because the market says what it is. But with currency, the market says what it is depending where you are in the world. Do you know what I mean? And that'll change while I mean, look at the look at the look at the dollar at the moment. I mean, we've got eyes on the dollar at the moment because it's in the pound and inflation. But can that happen to Bitcoin? I don't think it can. Really don't think it can.
Yeah,
Don't know.
no.
What's your thoughts on that?
Well, as far as like in the inflation occurring in Bitcoin, sorry, I'm not sure if I follow you.
So Bitcoin has a sort of stable. Well, it oscillates, but it oscillates, and at the moment, it's oscillating in a range. And I have my theory as to it's a range like this, whether it will suddenly go off up to 120,000, or whether it will then go up to 75,000 and then come down to 40,000 gradually, which is what it's done the past two oscillations. If we have one more oscillation like that to actually prove there's some stability going on with the value of Bitcoin, with the market. Up until this point with fiat currency, where or even before that, where people were using glass beads and we've used all sorts of things as currency, and basically someone can always come along and they can debase that currency because they can find a way to make it cheaper, and so they can add their own value in it and take advantage of it. You can't do that with Bitcoin. It just can't be done because humans don't decide the value of it. The market, the whole market, it's all the value of Bitcoin is decided by consensus, not even democracy. Everybody agrees what Bitcoin is. And if they don't agree, they don't buy it. And that in itself is part of consensus. I don't agree to pay that for you, so I won't buy it. And it's like, well, I won't sell it to you then. But that hasn't been the case with fiat currency, where the government turns around and says, we'll just make more because the market's not quite working the way we want it is, but because we're close to the source, we'll get really rich and we can filter it down to you. And then the workers, the people that are actually doing the proof of work to add the value, are just being raped of their value and their time by the people close to the banks. That can't happen with Bitcoin. Although there is something different in that you have to have a little bit more savviness about it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think with the as far as the end game in Bitcoin, you go down the rabbit hole far enough, and you kind of realize that a lot of what people think is possible is based on what people will let happen or what certain people will approve of. And Bitcoin is kind of not operating at that level; it's operating at a higher level, right? And that's one of the fascinating things about the asset is that it doesn't matter what anybody thinks about it, right? This is like a force that's acting on humanity that none of us can change, right? Not, it's it's kind of like that phrase, like you try to change Bitcoin, but Bitcoin changes you, and that's kind of like what's going on the global stage, right? At the end of the day, it's almost one of these things where if in that going back to that binary approach, like it either does what it's intending to do or the network fails. So, what are the reasonable odds of the network failing? Well, probably pretty low. But
we need electricity too much for the network to fail.
Yeah. So, but then you go down the rabbit hole a little bit further. Like, what happens as it plays out, right? Like, what
happens where?
What happens as as that narrative plays out? Like, I think you have as you have a hyperinflating economies all over the world, and you have more and more people purchasing Bitcoin and holding it in fashions that can't be stolen or censored, then it's creating an environment where the capital is flowing away from, eventually the capital is kind of flowing away from the government and moving towards those individuals, right? So wherever those individuals congregate and wherever that capital flows, it's probably going to be, after, whenever you hit that inflection point afterwards, they'll probably be very relevant. Like I wouldn't be surprised if in the near term future, El Salvador is like all of a sudden a relevant country. You know what I mean? Like, and that'll happen
You said
pretty. It'll happen pretty quickly. Yeah.
you said something really interesting a few minutes ago, and it's just hit me. You said it's not how you change Bitcoin; it's how Bitcoin changes you. That's fascinating. Because the more I think about it, it is because you can't change Bitcoin. You can't do it, but it definitely changes your behavior based on it. And it's kind of interesting how it will give people the true value of what they think they're worth. You know what I mean? Because you'll you'll do your work, and you'll eventually, when enough people are into it, they'll do their work and they'll go home and they'll change their wages. They'll put their savings into Bitcoin instead of, if the dollar fails. But the sooner people think to put their money into Bitcoin, the more chance they are of holding their own value and keeping hold of their own time. And those that don't have it will sort of fade away, but it will carry on as normal. It's a kind of it was an interesting comment that you made. I found that really fascinating. I
Yeah,
might just
but
think about that for a long time.
we're seeing that happen on an individual level. But what happens when you see that happen on a societal level? What
Well,
is
it's
that?
already happening, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if we're there yet, but we may be close.
We're only 5, 10 years away from that. I think
I
it
mean,
wouldn't surprise me if El Salvador suddenly flipped and became a very relevant country.
yeah, I
You
would
know, as they
say,
become wealthier, they'll start becoming more secure and less dodgy place.
yeah, I think the survey I've seen is that 24% of Americans own crypto, but that might be a little misleading because what crypto do they own and how much? So it's not a very good. So I think the statistical figure that would be that you'd want to look at is how many Americans or just people in general, what percentage of either America or the world own the majority of their savings in Bitcoin. That would be the stat I would look at. So
Yeah, you've got to remember there's still a lot of people out there that don't have enough. I mean, most people can't even pull $100 together if they need it in a hurry. I mean, it's the same over here in the UK. In the UK, lots of people are living hand to mouth. So when it says 25, is that 25% of the population own Bitcoin, they reckon? And do they work it out in wallets, or is that 20% of the finance is held in Bitcoin and held by humans?
the
It's
survey
got different
number,
things, isn't it?
I think it just means like what percentage of Americans have ever owned crypto in like a period of a year or so. So that's not really,
Oh, okay.
you would qualify in that statistic if you know, um, bought shitcoin XYZ and then sold it a minute later and never bought Bitcoin, So,
That's like 60 million Americans have got some Bitcoin or have Bitcoin. That's a lot.
well, they've at least
A
interacted
lot.
with the crypto market, in some way.
Exactly, yeah.
So that it's not significant. They're not necessarily people holding a significant amount of Bitcoin, but they are people who have interacted with the market enough to buy it. So they're at least they're KYC'd on the on ramps. And if there ever
Yeah.
was something lit a fire under their ass that they really need to buy Bitcoin, then they're on the on ramps. So it's
I
significant. Yeah.
tell you what I find fascinating. I wonder how many people over the past 10 years have got wallets that are full of Bitcoin dust that is now worth a significant amount. Because you know how you can never get that last tiny little bit of Bitcoin out. Well, you go back 6, 7 years. Those little bits of Bitcoin you couldn't get out were like zero point 0.1 of Bitcoin, but now that little bit of you can't get out is like 0.0001. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I wonder if there's some people that are a lot wealthier than they originally. One of Bitcoin's 3 grand. I wonder how many dead wallets there are with just little bits of dust in them.
Yeah, man, it's pretty interesting. I mean, I don't know. I'm definitely excited for the future. I'm hopeful for the future
Yeah,
also, and I don't think
yeah.
I would be that way if not for Bitcoin. Like to me, it's the
No,
it's
same.
to me it's the shining star on the horizon. Really, like there's just no, I just try to imagine a world without it, right? And and you can look at people currently, right, who fall into despair, and
Yeah,
there's a lot of people out there, and for good reason too. I mean, you know, like why, you kind of most people are faced with a situation where they can't create a life for themselves through traditional means. I mean, they could if they get creative, but through the traditional pathway, that's just they're being rug pulled, you know, and
yeah.
so yeah.
And it's weird. There's still loads of people that you try and tell them about Bitcoin and they're not interested. And not interested in it. I find it fascinating, particularly with what's going on all over the world. You know what I mean? There's wars, there's currency, there's just devaluing left, right, and centre. And you try and tell someone about Bitcoin, they're still not interested.
You know
It's,
what? Now I was listening. I was listening to you guys talking about. I pretty much agree with everything you've said. Just to put, a little bit of pessimism because otherwise we would be too, over optimistic. And I
yes,
would say, although I do agree with everything, and for me that's the end goal, and that's your paradise at the end of the rainbow. So when you reach the other side, and we're all well and good, but before reaching to Candyland, I would be a little bit worried about what could happen in between. Because these kind of transitions historically are never all well and good. There are always a little bit of sufferance when there is a shift in power. It's never peaceful.
we're going through that now, though, aren't we? That's exactly what we're going through now. And it's interesting because we saw this 20 years ago when on a much smaller scale when
Yeah,
those guys came out with Napster and BitTorrent. You realise
yeah,
without BitTorrent, we wouldn't have Bitcoin either. BitTorrent was the last bit of technology that was required in order to be able to make Bitcoin possible. But what happened? I watched it really closely because I'm in the music industry. But the music industry exploded over BitTorrent. They didn't like it. They really fought and they really fought and they really. We just happened doing this now with the banks, and of course the banks are much bigger than record companies, and I think it'll go on a lot longer. I agree with you, Magic. No, I agree with you 100%. But I think we're going through it now. I think this is the
Well,
time.
no, what you can think of is, take the collapse of the Soviet Union. That was not a.
Yeah,
I think that's a great example for what we're probably going to see, right? Because their financial system
which
just
is
collapsed, and
which is
it.
why I'm worried. Yeah,
But it wasn't. But it wasn't a violent thing, right? Like the Soviet Union was a violent, brutal dictatorship that committed genocide and murdered a bunch of people. But its collapse wasn't violent at all. It was actually
no, that's
very
fine.
weird because it was strange because it happened like instantly. Like people went to bed and they woke up and there was no Soviet regime in the morning. And it was just nothing, they're just gone, you know. And I think that's a good model for what you see when the state collapses.
I
One
think,
minute they're there and
I
then the
think,
next minute they're just gone.
yeah,
Like
I think it's worth remembering that the state and the reason for that being around it is only for a small handful of people who want to maintain power. The majority of the people actually wanted the freedom and wanted to get out of that deadlock, if you like. I remember when the Berlin Wall came down, I was about, how old was I? I must have been about 18, 19. And it was a big thing. And it was a great day. I remember the day. Do you know what I mean? It was like, because there was East and West Germany. I mean, we forget about that. East Germany was like, I think it was a communist regime as well, and that it was a big deal when that Berlin Wall came down. It was all over the news for ages. You had bands playing on top of the wall and all this sort of thing, and it was a great day. Everyone was like really happy. And the same, and the Soviet Union collapsed. I think it's a couple of, around the same sort of time. I think. I think the people want it. It's those few people that hold power, Putin's of the world, that refuse to let go.
G7, thank you. Disconnected. Ready to connect.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but that might be the problem. I really hope it won't be, but it could be one of the problems because you can have the majority of the population inside a country or a continent to agree on a change, but the people in charge, I don't know how they will react. Because let's face it, you got a bunch of bureaucrats and politicians basically holding the fate of millions of people. So
Yeah, but what I'm saying
Yeah,
is
I
that
mean,
if the fiat system collapses, then the government is gone overnight. They just don't exist. It's like when Voldemort was killed and he just fades into dust. It's just like the evil spirit releases and it's just gone. That's what would happen if you had a fiat collapse. Like it would just.
yeah,
Ready to connect.
So I don't know if I'd necessarily think it'd be a nuclear war, but I don't actually think it would be quite different. I think it would be a very peaceful thing, actually. I mean, now of
no,
course
no,
the
no.
lead
I
the lead
wasn't. Wasn't.
the lead into
I
that.
wasn't referring to a nuclear war. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you're right in the sense that towards the end, the lead into that, right, would be chaotic, right? Like
Yeah.
as it circles the drain before the last final day, that would be very chaotic. But like the actual collapse itself, like the actual event, would be not violent. I don't think. But I think you're totally right about the leading up to that. Yeah,
do you not
probably
think
be.
that's happening now? Do you not think that's what's going on at the moment?
Well, I think it is going on at the moment. Yeah.
The football analogy, I think it's great. I think that's actually happening now and will be happening for the next 5, 10 years. I don't think it's going to go away in a hurry. I think come sort of 2030, I think the world's going to settle down a little. I mean, you're always going to have wars because human beings we just like killing each other, don't we? But I think I think we'll go into a stable time again, and the world will shift. It has to because of what's happened over the past 20 years with like internet technology. Technology has moved us, changed us. We're cyborg.
Yeah, yeah.
Phone.
I don't know if it really fits in the conversation, but do you kind of agree with this underlying theme about transitioning from globalization to getting back to individualism, if you wish, so having some sort of a reverse process
I don't
compared to
know.
what we saw the last 30 years, right?
I
Do
know
I agree
nothing
with
about
on a
that. That
personal
sounds
level?
fantastic.
I agree. I totally agree with that. Or I would want that. But as far as will that happen? It depends. I mean, I think we kind of talked about how Bitcoin affects like jurisdictional arbitrage, right? Which just means that if you have free flowing capital, it can cross nation states, and it will naturally flow to the ones that are the most favorable and the best ones. So yeah, so if you have an environment where nation states are collapsing and capital is flowing in Bitcoin, not necessarily everyone will collapse, but there will probably be some that, the ones where capital flows will be the ones that survive. And those will probably be good places to live because, they have.
What do you think designates that? Do you think it's geographical or?
Well, no, I mean, you look at like a country like Portugal, right? Like Portugal has done some things like that. Um, Not that Portugal is, an example for the world, but it comes to mind as one country that has like a favorable tax structure.
Yeah,
Um,
and they've got they've done some Portugal's done some really interesting things over the past 10 years. They managed to they had a big heroin problem, they had a big drug